Today we would like to talk about respect and how important for us as building relationships and having relationships with one another, whether it's family, friends at our job, or anything that we do, or people that we cross. How important one must have respect for one another. Rich, would you like to start off with that?
Yeah, as I mentioned to you before, Ethan, in my humble opinion, of all of the behaviors that we demonstrate, I believe that respect is by far the most important one to master. And the reason I say that is personally, when I feel respected, I want to engage with the person who is demonstrating that respect to me. When I don't feel respected, I just as soon leave the environment and go somewhere else. And there's a lot to respect. It does. It has a lot of ramifications in a relationship.
Mm-hmm. You have this question right here. How do we demonstrate and show respect?
I took the time to write down a few things that I think are relatively easy to do. They came to me rather quickly, and there could be a lot. There probably is a lot more, but and I'll go through the list. One is paying attention to people. Listening, and when I say listening is different than hearing. And then listening happens to be one of the behaviors that I think we all struggle with. Because when someone else is talking, aside from listening, we tend to go to a thought process determining how we want to respond to what we're taking in. Understanding is another key element to respect. When I feel I'm really being understood, I feel that the person I'm interacting with is really connecting with me. And by acknowledging in the process of understanding, when somebody says something and I repeat what they say and acknowledge the value of what they say, to me, that also is a key point. Affirmation. When somebody when I have an opportunity to affirm a person for who they are, even if they're in a category or a part of life that I might not be comfortable with or I might not even approve of. There's a certain way that we could affirm one another to cause one another to feel good. And of course, appreciation. When we feel appreciated, we feel respected, and we could show appreciation in many, many different ways. Curiosity. In a conversation, when somebody says something to me and it opens a door for me to be inquisitive in terms of what they're talking about and leads me to a point where I might be able to gain a stronger understanding of them, curiosity is big. Body language is huge. When we talk to one another, we could shut one another down by having what I call cold body language or receptive body language. Those are, those are areas you don't even have to say anything, but how many times have we found ourselves perhaps saying something to someone and they roll their eyes? And, sometimes they could roll their eyes and that may be because they're excited or, wow, that means a lot. But how do we interpret it when somebody rolls their eyes? That could break down respect. Of course, tone of voice is critical, eye-to-eye contact. Empathy, being empathetic, being able to truly feel what the other person is feeling, which is not easy to do, but it's a critical aspect of it. And then our sincerity and genuineness. When we're really engaged with someone and we could cause them to believe that we're really sincere about it, that's important. And you'll notice I said when we could cause them to believe. Sometimes we have to go a little bit beyond our own feelings to convince somebody that we're being respectful. Sometimes it's difficult, but it's when we extend our own behaviors to the capacity of wanting to help somebody else that they become most meaningful. And of course, being polite. And I made a note that respect does not require approval or agreement. So that's a little bit about, how do we demonstrate respect? And we could talk about each one of those if you would like to. So I'll leave it at that. Yes.
I have a question. Could you talk a little bit more about the skill or building the skill of listening?
as it relates to like developing relationships and showing respect?
Building the skill for listening, Mike. Yes. I'll tell you, it's really kind of a simple answer, but very hard to do. It takes practice. Like any other skill that we want to develop, it takes practice. Now, all of us know the level of listening that we're capable of doing or that we demonstrate. So if I want to make my listening better, I have to figure out what can I do. If I'm serious about it, number one, I have to have a strong self-awareness about, okay, we're in a group right now together, and it's imperative that I listen to anything anybody has to say. So the discipline of self-awareness is number one. Number two, focusing on what is being said to me as opposed to where I want to go with the thought. That's probably, for me, the most difficult part of it. But if we practice it, okay, if you wanted to provide a self-examination that you could use on a regular basis, it's by saying what I did when you said to me, Mike, how could I improve my listening skill? I repeated to you, okay, so what you wanted me to talk about is how I could improve my listening skill. That tells you that I heard you the way that you wanted me to. And if I didn't, it gives you the opportunity to say, no, Rich, that's not what I meant, and then and then correct me. And the key is not to drift away from the conversation.
It's just about to say.
It takes a lot of self-discipline and self-awareness to be a good listener, especially when the conversation is more important to the speaker than it is to the listener. And that's where respect is demonstrated and how much you're really in tune with that.
Yeah, I have a question going into some of the examples here. I noticed, like I work for AT&T. I deal a lot with customers and stuff like that. But I noticed a lot of times, especially with my coworkers, I have a light voice. My voice is not very deep. But I notice my interactions with customers sometimes, I get the feeling that they kind of look through me or past me sometimes. I don't know if it's because of my voice, but I noticed some of my other coworkers who have a deeper voice can get the customer's attention a lot faster than I do. And I don't know how to kind of describe it, but sometimes I just feel like I don't have that deep voice. It's people who have a deeper voice, or even my buddy he's about 6'5", and he's just big and he has a deep voice, and he walks into the room and
Big presence.
People just notice him, and I can feel like he gets this type of respect automatically right off the jump. Whereas me, I feel like I got to work and talk to customers, and I don't get the same kind of like. I hope you understand what I'm saying. But
I do.
Tone of voice for me, growing up, I've never had a deep voice, and it's always felt like people I didn't get the same kind of reactions that others got.
This is what I'm understanding. You have a soft voice, and sometimes you feel that people are kind of like talking through you, when there are other people who might be loud or might be bigger in stature, and they get noticed. Okay, it's really interesting because when I was in the service, I had the good fortune of going to leadership school to become a drill instructor, and one of the things that we were taught is to make sure that we could be heard, because we didn't have the technology then that we have now. So you had to really, really talk loud. So I learned that. As a result, I tend to be more loud than other people sometimes. Another part of my understanding of what you might be going through is there could be a level of insecurity, a level of doubt about yourself that may be playing on you, that other people are not seeing, that you are possibly feeling. So your personality style happens to be of one that you are a softer person. However, if you want that to change, you mentioned those things that you feel are affecting you in possibly a negative way. So that may mean that you're going to have to learn how to elevate your voice a little bit. Your body language. I know that we all know that when we encounter people that have a good posture, they lean forward in their conversations, and they actually demonstrate a level of enthusiasm that causes them to be a little bit more charismatic. I compare the way that we behave toward one another to acting in a movie or on TV. I'll tell you something that's really interesting. I was thinking about Jim Carrey over the weekend. And do you know who Jim Carrey is?
Oh, yeah.
He's really the guy is a fabulous actor. Now, let me tell you what he was interviewed, and they were talking about, what do you do in preparation to the different parts you play? Now, once Jim Carrey understands the part he's going to play, at that moment, he stops being who he is, and he demonstrates that character every day, every minute, all the time. He totally changes the person he is, intentionally, to the point where it bothers people. People don't know how to communicate with him because he's acting, okay? So there's a lot to learn from that style that he portrays. Now, I'm not saying that if you want to be a little bit more bold, you ought to be throwing out your chest and yelling at people. No. Once we become aware of those things we want to have different, it's up to us to know how to make them different. And if we don't know, there's always a way to learn it. You know, there are probably people that when they speak, you listen because you kind of like it's their demeanor. Now, I've picked up, there are certain people that when they talked, I was always really impressed, not by the message, but by the way they deliver. Barack Obama, a phenomenal communicator. Joel Osteen, a phenomenal communicator. Watch those guys. Watch their stature. Watch they do several things. They demonstrate a level of confidence without losing a sense of humility. And it's all practice. I also had the good fortune to go to a school in Atlanta when I was in the corporate world. And it was a school that their theory was to speak so that people will listen. And what they taught us is not what to say, but how to say it. How to stand erect, how to look at a person and make a point before you look at another person to make another point. And there are things like that we can learn if you want to change that demeanor.
When I used to be a marketing manager for ServPro back around 2004. And I went to it's called the Yes Network, and it was about marketing and sales. And the emphasis that they were saying to me was that when you're dealing with people, being loud isn't always the right thing if you want, because if you're just loud and you've got their attention, doesn't mean that they're listening. It means that they're annoyed. They could be a lot of things. Actually disturbed or feel like they're, now you're in my space. Yeah. The key was matching the tempo of the person you're speaking to. So if someone, you ring the doorbell, you open it up, he's like, hey, then you say, hey, how are you? Right. You match what they're doing. If people have their arms crossed, you may want to kind of have a closed at first posture with them. And then as things open up or they're open in their personality or in their behavior, you kind of mimic that, and it kind of creates brings that unsettledness away. But if you just being loud doesn't always mean Correct. You're being heard, because people just tend to sound off things. Some people just turn off as soon as they hear it. If they're your personality, where you're a softer spoken person, and somebody that's real loud and obnoxious comes in, you may pay attention to them, but not for the right reasons. And that to me would be something I would be concerned about, is that I understood how to create a behavior that will make people want to hear your voice and listen to what you're saying.
That's well said.
I have a question. I hope it's not going to take us too far off the topic, but it does relate directly to the conversation.
It's okay.
So you mentioned the possibility of a confidence, maybe disparity somewhere. Is there any way that you could offer any tips, techniques, anything like that to help to boost an individual's like self-confidence?
Yes, and I've done it, and it worked for me. You fake it. Now, I know that sounds really like, why would we say something like that in a group like this? I could remember years ago, I was in my mid-20s. I was at a party with my first wife, and there was this guy that was really big and strong, and he was being a little bit too forward with my wife. His name was Marty, and I'll never forget how I did this. And when I decided to do it, I didn't know it was going to work. I went up to him with what appeared to be a level of confidence that this person felt I wasn't going to back down no matter what. And I got pretty close to his face and I said, Marty, knock it off. And he did. So a lot of it is we could predetermine the impression of confidence simply by having a mindset to do it. When I played football and I was in the huddle and I'm quarterback calling plays, I could remember having to discipline a couple of linemen when they weren't doing their job. And the way that I did it with my tone of voice and with the assurance that I felt I had, it works. So the thing is, don't let your own self get in the way of who you can really be, of the strength that you have inside of you. It's usually us that keeps us from going as far as we're capable of going.
And what I see there is you're demonstrating when the purpose behind what you're doing becomes more important than how you feel, then you will jump to the opportunity to do the right thing.
The purpose will determine how I feel usually. You're absolutely correct in that process.
So even if I preach on a Sunday morning at the church, I care more about the Word of God going forth than I do about how I feel. And when I don't make it about me. I make it about what needs to be done. And we will do a lot of things as men in our house, for our job, for all that stuff, because we know what needs to be done. And if you make it about you, then you'll start thinking about your lack. But if you make it about the purpose, you'll rise quicker to doing the right thing.
Yeah, and what we want to understand is we're looking at developing a level of, I call it, confidence and self-esteem go hand in hand. And what many people struggle with is they don't get a lot of affirmation from the environment that they're in. So it's hard for them to develop that confidence and self-esteem. And that is where I know when I was in the corporate world back in my early 40s, I really felt somewhat neglected. I felt that I really wasn't fitting in, and I wasn't getting the affirmation that I needed at the time. And fortunately for me, at that time, I was introduced to a multi-level marketing program that had a lot of Christian people that had very high values, values that were similar to mine. And there were people that were recognizing my values and priorities in a way that they gave me a lot of reassurance. So sometimes we need to check out the environment that we're in if we're not getting the reassurance we need and look to change the environment. Start reading. It was back then that I learned about Miles Monroe, and I started reading what Miles Monroe said. I started going to and read about other people that were being admired and respected and looked at the things that they did that cause people to truly respect them. And when you get respect, you get confidence. So, I mean, all of that goes into the question that you asked earlier is, how do you develop that confidence? It starts from within, but look at where you're putting yourself. Look at the environment that you're in. And is it fitting? Are you getting the affirmation that you need? And then you have to respond accordingly.
So my question is, you mentioned the possibility and the proper levels of affirmation in one's environment. My question is, how, or is there any way to know whether or not I'm getting the affirmation that I really need. Because if you don't know what you don't know. And so if I grow up with, for instance, you know, some level of low self-esteem or a lack of self-confidence or awareness or whatever, if I've never experienced the proper or appropriate level of affirmation, then how do I know what I'm missing? How can I diagnose it in order to know what the remedy is?
First of all, I believe that there are probably some situations in your life where you felt really good when you were with the people around you. Even if you could only remember one or two or three of those things. Okay, capture that. And what was going on, what was there in that interacting situation that caused you to have that feeling? Can you identify it? What wasn't there that happens to be in other environments? So there's two things that I always look at in many problems that I address. What needs to be added or what needs to be removed? So everyone has a certain time when you really feel good about something. I used to, when my Uncle Rudy was alive, and he's been gone for many, many years now, but he was my biggest affirmation partner. Uncle Rudy was a truck driver. When I was a little boy going through school, most of the people were concerned about the fact that I was doing very poor academically. And I would get things like, Rich, unless you go to college, you know, you're not going to amount to anything. You got to do this, you got to do that. Uncle Rudy said something to me that had a very lasting impression to this day. He said, Richie, don't listen to anybody. With your personality, kid, you've got nothing to worry about. That's what I chose to stick. I didn't choose to have the things that people said I wouldn't be able to do stick with me. I look for people that see something in me that I see in myself, and I remember those people and what they told me. So much of it is what you want to keep internally that continues to drive your heart and your mind.
Rich, you know, as we're discussing this, I tend to look at things in a much more broad way. You know, we've all heard the term, you can't see the forest for the trees.
Yes.
And while the trees are important, oftentimes we don't understand how the trees interact with the rest of the forest. Okay, so then therefore we need a broader understanding of how the forest is and then see how the trees work. So what am I saying? When we're dealing with human interaction, that's so broad and that is so intricate, if you will, okay, that I believe many times we, not knowing this, we get caught up in ourselves, okay?
No doubt.
And not necessarily for the wrong reason. Two things. We know the scripture says, you know, when Jesus was asked the two greatest commandments, first one, love the Lord thy God with all your heart, soul, and mind, right? So in other words, God is first. Then the second one is love your neighbor as yourself, right? And he says these two encapsulate the whole law, right?
Yep.
So when it comes to human interaction and respecting someone else, we also know that Paul talked about where he says esteem other better than self, right?
Yep.
But then Jesus also talked about respect your persons and how not to do that, okay? So what I'm getting at is this. When I'm interacting with someone else, do I understand that God said all souls are mine? So therefore, as I interact with that individual, do I recognize that I'm interacting with God? Do I keep that in mind? Okay. The scripture says esteem other better than themselves, but that goes both ways, right?
This is great stuff.
So then now, if I'm giving someone respect, do they just take it because they figure, well, I'm in this office and therefore that respect is due to me? Because we know that Jesus spoke against that. Okay. So you see what I'm talking about when I say all these dynamics?
I completely do.
And so the bottom line is, to me, is when I interact with someone else, do I understand that I'm interacting with God?
Okay.
Okay. Now, many people, I understand, don't see it that way. Okay. But I believe, especially those of us who profess to know our walk with the Lord,
Right.
we really do need to look at it that way. Whether the other person we're interacting with sees it that way or not.
Because it's really it's good thought. If I recall, you said when I interact with someone else, I want to have the mindset that I'm interacting with God.
Yes.
Do I have that right? Mm-hmm. Okay. You know who knows how to answer that question best? You. Seriously. Because that is the whole key to part of this conversation. There's a couple of things you touched on that I think are critical. You use the word interest and you use the word understanding. Now, the other thing that you mentioned is how the other person may be receiving it, as opposed to, well, I deserve it, that's what you should be saying. You have no control over that. Mm-hmm. You only have control over what comes out. And you don't always have control over what comes back. Now, you have control over what you do with what comes back. Mm-hmm. Okay? So to begin with, the first thing I wanted to respond to is the word interest. When I'm genuinely interested in someone, they know it. And everyone in this room knows that when you've encountered somebody, even who you may not care for, or even if they don't care for you, when you develop an interest in them, you recognize that the dynamics change in a favorable way. So number one first is interest. The next thing is understanding. Everything that I've learned in terms of my own personal growth and development comes from understanding. To what degree are you willing to expand your willingness to understand more so that you could be more of who God wants you to be? And that's the key. I happen to be very inquisitive in that respect. I enjoy understanding people. There are other personalities that really are not that concerned about how well they understand one another. It isn't that important to them. It just so happens that in my experience for nearly 80 years, the relationship, the developing communication and relationship building has been a core to my growth and development. More so than anything else I've done. That's for me. It doesn't have to be for everybody.
Rich, I find that there's a level of maturity that has to go with that. Because with many people, I find when you hear what they're saying, if you personally don't agree with them, then you stop listening and you start thinking about how to respond. Okay? And that's the wrong thing to do.
That's exactly where listening breaks down. Mm-hmm. Exactly. The other word you used was mature.
Yes.
When you think about maturity, what is maturity to you?
When I think about maturity, I think about self-sacrifice for the greater good.
Okay.
And I also think about utilizing the experiences that I've gained to be able to help others.
Right. So what you just told me was what behaviors it takes to demonstrate maturity. Okay, to me, and I think those are very accurate descriptions. Maturity, to me, is the ability to continuously improve in such a way that you have more that God has given you to give back to Him. That's how I see it.